Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the movies well worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. Combining questions, trivia, and games, every episode we're challenged to watch a piece of film history to decide whether it deserves to be remembered for all time in our movie vault. With every film chosen in our previous episode, it's the perfect way to watch and discuss along at home. But don't just take my word for it. Here's a snippet of what to expect in today's episode.
When you heard the title of this film, am I the only person who thought that his alter ego was going to be a nun?
Oh no, I thought that too.
Oh, thank goodness.
I think I've been watching too much Dairy Girls because obviously there's Sister Michael and that. And I was like, oh, Sister Hyde, she'll be a nun, that's fine.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Are you not entertained? Great Scott! I'll be back.
Here's Johnny. You're a wizard, Harry.
They call me Mr. Tibbs.
I'm Batman.
And beyond.
Oh, hi, Mark.
Well, good movies.
Welcome to Well Good Movies, the podcast that gives you the movies well worth watching, even if there are some duds along the way. I'm your host, David Osger, and I'm joined, as ever, by my co-host, Dr. Craig.
I think you'll find this time I am Craigie Hyde. Seriously, why do you ever think that you're on this podcast with what could be considered the mild-mannered and kind version of me?
I thought that I was going to go with Mr. McDonald. I thought I might have two introductions there. I'd get like Happy Craig and then Angry Craig.
Yeah, to be fair, Mr. McDonald would be the representation of just me being absolutely angry.
That's just the Karen version of you.
That weirdly cut me so deep, and I can't describe why.
So, as we alluded to there, Craig, we talk about movies well worth watching, despite duds along the way. So just to tease the audience at home, do you think today's movie is a dud or well worth watching?
I just want to check. Do we know if Sarah from last week is listening? Sorry, Sarah. You might not like things that I say on this podcast. I think it's somewhere in the middle, leaning closer to dud.
Ooh, bit of a first so far, which is quite fun. So,
I tried to break through this like binary that you've tried to create of good or bad.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, fair enough.
Nothing is that black or white. Well, we'll get on to soon why that might be the case. But for anyone who didn't catch our previous episode and doesn't know what Craig is on about there with Sarah, can you just recap us, Craig, on what we're watching and how we came to watch it?
Yep. So in yet another guest v host situation of the Endgame, David took on our last guest, Sarah, where she was able to come out victorious because she was the one to best able identify different personalities of movie characters inhabiting different movie characters' bodies. In the end, she decided, because she is a massive fan of everything to do with the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, to make us look at the 1971 film Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
Awesome. So, yeah, going back to the sort of era of the 60s and 70s is going to be very fun, and one that none of us on the podcast had seen before. So we look forward to discussing Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971 and undertaking our usual task of deciding whether it goes into the movie vault, our vault of movies that celebrates chosen films for all time. But before that, we have a new guest joining us on Well Good Movies today. So please welcome editor, podcaster, and writer for Movie Scramble and Jump Cut Online, Mary Muñoz. Hello, Mary.
Hello, thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So thank you for joining us, especially on the blessed day that is Star Wars Day.
Baby Yoda's birthday.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So for everyone at home, we're recording on May the 4th. We're not going mad. We know this isn't out on May the 4th, but we're obviously talking about a film that's very little to do with Star Wars, but we thought we'd still get that representation in, and luckily we have a massive Baby Yoda / Grogu fan with us.
Sorry, very little. I would say if you counted everything up, it would have absolutely nothing to do with Star
Well,
Wars.
I'm just thinking in our world in which you get these tedious links between films, if somebody wanted to have some kind of dual personality, light and dark, I don't know.
I think the vaguest connection you can have is the association of actors amongst the studio of this film.
Potentially, yeah, but...
Vague as hell, David.
Just wait until Empire Strikes Back is recommended for next week at the end of this episode. So, yeah, Mary, you're a big Grogu fan. Were you a big Star Wars fan before seeing Baby Yoda, or was it because of Mando that you saw came on board?
No, so I remember when I was weeer, since I'm only 5 foot, my dad took me to the cinema when they re-released all the original Star Wars movies, and I kind of fell in love with cinema in general, but Star Wars then, and obviously with the Mandalorian, being like the lockdown thing to watch, I've sort of fallen in love with a small green bean. So yeah, I've been Grogu'd all day today.
That's good. Yeah, so you have all the merch, you have a t-shirt, you have some ears.
Yes. I mean, there's Baby Yoda literally in every room in my house. It's quite embarrassing. But yeah, the ears that I have are clearly made for a child, because I've had to put them on sort of sporadically today because they don't fit my lollipop head.
Yeah, so like further back of the head rather than sort of like right at the front. Yeah, well, I'm also trying to rep with my Star Wars t-shirt. I got Yoda, his distant relative or his mate in the background there with R2-D2. So, but as you said on Twitter, quite rightly, you are the potential parent of Grogu, not Yoda.
Yeah, I've laid claim to him.
That's actually Mando season 3 is you and Mando duking it out.
Oh, I'd love that. If there's any Disney executives listening, I'm very much available to do this.
I would watch a lot of Star Wars parental court decisions being played out.
Mando being made to remove his helmet in court.
Yeah, my head kind of went first to like Darksaber Duel or something, but yeah, I think I prefer that, just an actual, Judge Judy Star Wars sort of moment.
Love that.
Mary, obviously you're on here as you're a big fan of movies, as you said there,
yes,
by watching the old Star Wars movies. You're also, like us, a podcaster. You also write for several websites. Can you just tell us then a bit about what you do and some of the kind of films you enjoy talking and writing about?
Sure. So I am an editor and podcaster at Movie Scramble. We are a Glasgow-based film review site. Our podcast was born from a drunken trip to the pub, like all good Glaswegian ideas are. And we've been on the go now for, I think, around about a decade. And we cover, obviously, things like Glasgow Film Festival and a lot of smaller indies, as well as, obviously, the big blockbusters. And I'm also a staff writer for Jump Cut Online. Been busy doing lots of Star Wars content for today. And I joined the team there in March of last year. There's a sort of ongoing joke, both on my Twitter and various film groups that I'm a part of, that I'm a big war film fan. And that is actually true when I look at all the films that I actually really enjoy. So yeah, a lot of war films, a lot of classic Hollywood cinema, a lot of musicals, a lot of Hitchcock. And I'm a big fan of any sort of like really grisly thrillers, like your kind of Sevens type thing, anything that's a bit kind of mean and moody with some blood thrown in.
Awesome. Yeah. Nice mix there, nice bit of variety. And yeah, it kind of like ties into what we're talking about today. Because I think when I was watching some of the behind the scenes of today's film, they were talking about musical influences almost. And I was like, oh, okay, quite surprised by that. But yeah, I think it does come through slightly if you kind of see what they were talking about in terms of the production. But we'll get on to that. And what kind of stuff do you talk about in terms of, Movie Scramble on the podcast, or, what was some of the kind of articles that you've written in the past?
So on the Scramble podcast, we'll usually pick a film that we've all been to see recently, and then we'll sort of tie that into a particular theme or an actor, and we'll chat about that for the podcast episode. On our site, we do obviously news, interviews, reviews, and occasionally sort of six of the best kind of list of those type of things. As I say, been doing lots of Star Wars content recently and hoping to get to see Doctor Strange this weekend, and hopefully be reviewing that because I'm obviously into a big Marvel blockbuster as well.
Yeah, that's definitely one that I'm very excited for.
Me too.
Yeah, so we've heard a lot about you insofar as a sort of more critical and enjoying film sort of aspect. How far does that expand insofar as do you also get involved with interesting things like looking at the trivia of films, doing things like challenges, or just, doing even like movie quizzes, for example?
I really love, there's nothing better than when you watch a film, especially if you're watching it at home, right? And then you go on IMDb afterwards and you scroll through all the trivia. However, what I will say is that for someone who watches a lot of films, obviously writes a lot of films, I'm the last person you want on a pub quiz team. I am so bad when it comes to being on the spot that I just go, and I forget everything. So I'll endeavour, but it's probably not something I'm going to be very good at.
I mean, that's going to be interesting for later. I think David only wanted this segment because he wanted to scope out competition before he has to face you in a game.
Oh, no, just know that I'm terrible. You'll be fine.
It's just so I can relate. This is so I can be like, yeah, don't worry, I'm the same too. We'll now go on to our main discussion today, which is the film that was chosen for us, which is Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde from 1971. This is from Hammer Horror or Hammer Film, which is obviously a very famous production company, especially within the UK, known for producing many sort of cult horror films and helping the likes of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee in terms of being some of their biggest stars, and obviously covering a lot of famous characters in terms of gothic stories, Dracula, the Mummy, etc., doing lots of risque pictures, thrillers, noirs, comedy. And then this film is from, as I said, the 1970s, and is Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, which is just one of their adaptations of this story. Surprisingly, they've never just done a straight up, Dr. Jekyll and Hyde, but they have had a few different interpretations of the story. So this looks at, a Victorian scientist tests a serum that transforms him into a sensuous murderess. It's directed by Roy Ward Baker, and obviously the writers, they credited the original story, which is by Robert Louis Stevenson, and the screenplay is credited to Brian Clemens. It stars Ralph Bates along with Martine Beswick and Gerald Sim as our main cast members. You also have the likes of Dorothy Allison, Neil Wilson, Louis Fiander, Ivor Dean, and Philip Maddock. And this was out in 1971 and is kind of in some ways typical to Hammer horror, but in other ways very different, and certainly an interesting cult film to dive into. And I guess the Hammer horror aspect is also interesting in terms of experience. I know I talked about it previously when we said about Halloween films, when I was talking about Dracula. But Mary, do you have any previous experience with Hammer as a film company? Have you seen many of them? What's your kind of impression when you hear, Hammer horror?
So just sort of very brief dalliances with Hammer, I guess. I've obviously seen your big sort of Christopher Lee movies, but I've not really, it's not something I've really looked at in depth. When I think of Hammer, I think of something, quite kitsch, maybe a little bit sort of I don't want to say sexy, but sort of flirting with the idea of sex, and obviously lots and lots of blood spatter. So I was looking forward to watching this, because it's not something that it's not a film studio that I've watched a lot of their work, but you kind of know what you're getting into, I feel like.
Yeah, and definitely known for their crazy far out ideas, and very much of that era in terms of when they were kind of crossing boundaries and pushing the limits and giving people what they wanted in terms of coming away from that era of more censorship and that kind of stuff, but also bigging up horror and your big theatrical gothic characters. Have you got any favorites in terms of actual your classic horror characters, even though some of them are obviously known for more your universal monsters, but obviously they've been covered as well within Hammer as well?
Yeah, do you know, I recently rewatched Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein, the James Whale films from the 30s, and I just forgot how emotional they are to watch. You really connect with the monster, and the sets are quite elaborate and the acting's really over the top, kind of like a Hammer. So I think that I would say Frankenstein's the most empathetic, but I love a Dracula movie. I'm a bit of a sucker for a sort of tall, dark, brooding stranger with fangs. So yeah, Dracula I would say was my favourite.
And pun not intended there for sucker for Dracula.
I didn't even know I'd done that yet.
So, and is there any go-to you think with Hammer that you remember seeing before, or were you going into this quite fresh of okay, I can't really remember the last time I saw Saw?
Totally going into it fresh. I genuinely couldn't tell you the last time I watched a Hammer horror. So I think that's why I was quite excited to get stuck into it. As I say, you kind of know the hallmarks of what a Hammer horror is. And I'm obviously familiar with Jekyll and Hyde, but really didn't know what to expect from this. And that's what was quite exciting about it.
Yeah, well, and our previous guest, Sarah, obviously loves Jekyll and Hyde just as a story and all the adaptations that it's got. Have you got much kind of experience with, you know, the original book or the other adaptations? There's been so many, or is it kind of the same? Like, I know for me, I kind of see it in like a kind of like Christmas Carol kind of way. Like, everyone knows the story, everyone knows what to expect, but there's so many variations out there, you know, it's hard to have seen them all.
Oh, 100%. I don't actually think I've seen a film version of Jekyll and Hyde, if I'm being really honest. It's just one of those kind of classic stories that you feel like you said, like you're really familiar with, even if you haven't read the book or seen a film. It's just something the concept is what you're familiar with.
Yeah, they kind of reference it and throw to it so much in other media, I guess. Craig, I guess I would also ask you, because you have a lot more experience with Jekyll and Hyde in television and, as we mentioned last time, with musicals, etc.
I'll tell you my favourite pop culture instance of Jekyll and Hyde. This genuinely is one of my favourites, although I realise this is going to make David laugh. There's an episode of Arthur where they just have all the characters singing, and they have Brain singing the song. Basically, he's just read Jekyll and Hyde, which, given how young those kids are on that show, I'm impressed they're giving them that novel. And he just sings this song where he just imagines himself as a scientist taking the potion. And just since I've ever seen it, every now and then my mind becomes overcome with, I was Jekyll, Jekyll, Hyde, Jekyll, Hyde, Hyde, Jekyll, 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 Hyde, Jekyll, Hyde. Just over and over and over again. That's the biggest influence of it, I guess.
I remember seeing this pop up on YouTube now. Like, as soon as you mentioned it, I was like, where do I know this from? Where have I seen it? And I don't know if it was one of those like Jekyll, Jekyll, Hyde for like 5 hours sort of joke videos or something like that. But yeah, I remember this now.
Yeah, but in more serious, obviously it was one of the texts I had to study at university, but also just I really love the stage musical, even if some people think it can be a bit overblown. I think it has some songs with some beautiful wordplay. I imagine most people, if they ever see the stage version, it's the recorded version with David Hasselhoff as Jekyll and Hyde, which is a little bit insane.
I didn't know that existed.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know where you'd be able to find it, but there are some great songs in it, especially their opening sort of number, just called Facade. Just basically just says everything you need to know. However, my favorite sort of story, sort of adaptation of Jekyll and Hyde, is the Stephen Moffat series Jekyll, with James Nesbitt. And I don't know why I seem to be the only person willing to defend this show that I found. It just has the sort of usual Moffat issue of just he cannot end stories in some situations, but the actual build-up of everything he's trying to do is actually quite interesting. And I just remember seeing the preview of just when Hyde is released for the first time to basically defend him from a mugger, and he basically kills the sort of mugger or the sort of thug on the street, and then the woman he was with, he basically turns to and sort of threatens. Actually, no, it's the scene before that. It's basically, he's got the upper hand and he's about to kill this mugger, and he says, "Luckily for you, I don't enjoy killing children." Snaps his neck, just turns around and says, "But I do enough." So I was like, lovely. But yeah, that's basically my sort of history with the character, and you've made allusion to the fact that I've dressed up as a Halloween as Jekyll and Hyde before. In a costume that didn't quite work, but the idea of it was good.
You had a cane and a hat. That's if you were in this film, you would have been a suspect as a murderer, because you would have had a cape and a hat.
I'm not that tall.
True. That's the only other defining point.
That was one of my favourite moments, where they just putting up this big poster of just wanted tall man in tall black hat and tall coat. He walks past and he's like, "I'm going to go home and burn all my clothes." Just, yeah, honestly.
Yeah, I just expected somebody just to be stood opposite and be like, "Wait, that's him." But yeah, it is crazy how many sort of areas Jekyll and Hyde has sort of got into, because as you were saying, Mary, I can't remember if I've seen an exact kind of movie adaptation, but then I think of things like Van Helsing and, League of Gentlemen and all that kind of stuff, in which like he's there appearing as one of these sort of famous characters like Dracula, etc. And then Craig mentioning the fact that series was by Stephen Moffat, I was like, oh yeah, and then he did Dracula as well later on, which was quite interesting. So yeah, a lot of these directors and creators seem to like to play with that kind of playhouse of classic horror characters like Jekyll, like Dracula.
Yeah, no, I'm gutted that the new sort of dark universe they were going to launch didn't launch. Obviously, they'd sort of alluded to Russell Crowe being Jekyll and Hyde and the new version of The Mummy. And I mean, that would have been amazing as far as I'm concerned. So I'm gutted that never really got off the ground.
Yeah, because I thought as bad as that Mummy film was, I thought he was actually one of the decent bits of it. Like there was kind of like they were alluding to it when he was in his lab and everything like that. And I was like, Russell Crowe quite often gets miscast in films, but I think that one was like, no, this is generally a good choice.
Yeah.
What, somebody who can be both mild-mannered and incredibly angry at any given moment?
I mean, that is Russell Crowe.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just making it clear that if Russell ever happened to listen to our show, he knows exactly what we think of it.
Do more of this. Yeah, I think that kind of assumption of like what the story is has a big influence on it, but also because this is such a twist on the story as well, it's quite interesting to go at it from that angle. So I suppose you go into the movie with lots of expectations, lots of perceptions about what Jekyll and Hyde is, what Hammer is, but also then that idea that like, oh, this is a twist on it and it's Sister Hyde. It's like, the female, side to him, which especially from previous episodes, we've talked about things like The Invisible Woman, and often these horror films don't have a great track record in terms of that kind of representation.
I do have a question for the class.
Go on.
When you heard the title of this film, am I the only person who thought that his alter ego was going to be a nun?
Oh no, I thought that too.
Oh, thank goodness.
I think I've been watching too much Dairy Girls because obviously there's Sister Michael and that, and I was like, oh, Sister Hyde, she'll be a nun, that's fine.
I just thought it would be weird that, like, because in the film she's Mrs. Hyde, and I'm just like, well, what specific reason is there for her being a sister in this? So I just thought she's going to be a nun, and that's why I was intrigued as to where this film was going to go. Then she wasn't, and I was like, well, I feel dumb now.
We can feel dumb together.
When I was watching the sort of behind the scenes to this, again, they don't really sort of reference it in the film or really in many of the credits or anything, but one of the experts who's talking about Hammer does refer to it as Edwina Hyde, which I was like, okay, interesting, kind of fits with...
I mean, it's not that interesting. It's just the fact that it's Edward Hyde, and they were like, what's the female equivalent of Edward? Edwina.
Yeah, but just in terms of that kind of like gothic sounding name as well. But yeah, this we'll keep the Edwinas to Chicken Run rather than evil sides to characters. Mary, what is your first reactions to it when you sort of finished watching the film? What was your reactions? What did you think of it overall?
Do you know, I think I went into it with perhaps really low expectations, and I think they served me well because I did really enjoy it. I thought it was lots of fun. I thought it played around with, identity really well. I quite like the sets that you can see that are really obviously painted, the sort of professional cockneys cutting about on the cobblestones. Like, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was like camp, fun, over the top. And yeah, I mean, it's a Hammer horror. How can you not enjoy it?
Yeah, I think, again, when I was watching the behind the scenes, there was one of the experts on there said that, like, the performances especially is like, it's very pastiche, but it's like walks the line. It doesn't go too far. They manage to just kind of be sort of playful, be pastiche about it, but not in a kind of silly or ridiculous way, which I think was quite a good way of putting it. And I think that the performances are a big part of that. As you said, the music, the sets, and also the fact that it is quite a traditional, typical story. There isn't kind of like, all these like unraveling webs. It's not like a big watch either. It's, just over like 90 minutes as well. So, it's quite a sort of like, neat time to it as well. Also interesting, we were talking about the history and the characters and everything as well. This is one that throws in other characters as well. They put Burke and Hare in here as well. There's a bit of Jack the Ripper as well. What was your reactions to that?
As a Scot, I was a question mark over why two Edinburgh body snatchers were in London, because they never made it there as far as I was aware. But it was a little bit fun. I quite like the fact they sort of conflated this idea of his alter ego becoming Jack the Ripper. I quite like that because it adds that little bit of historical truth to it. And obviously, because no one knows who Jack the Ripper is, there's every possibility that it could have just been a madman stroke woman in his lab in London. But I quite like the sort of conflating of the two ideas. I thought it worked. It certainly worked for the story they were trying to tell anyway.
Yeah, I think like I alluded to earlier, my biggest takeaway was also I just had this fear that it was going to be of that time of like Invisible Woman, this kind of like very sexist, kind of ridiculous, like my first thought, I actually didn't think of the nun thing, I'll be honest, but maybe just because of the way the Sarah described it. But I was so fearful that you'd get this very much like woman out for revenge kind of aspect of like, oh, she's going to be killing men and, like she feels wronged or something like that. And they would go very much typical with that. And they start to build up to that a bit with the Professor Robertson character, in which he's like talking about these women that he fancies and how he spent his night, etc. And I was like, oh, okay, are we going to be going down this path? And if it's handled well, then I don't think it's too much of a problem. But you don't want just that typical kind of like women are the enemy kind of aspect, or like, oh no, it's horrific because he's turned into a woman. And even at that time, it's crazy to think that this was done, because you look now in which gender politics is such a big thing, but this was like before all of you saw Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, and people have acknowledged it as a kind of quite remarkable film for sort of tackling the idea of gender and sort of like, I guess maybe drag in some ways, or like cross-dressing, if you want to call it that. But yeah, I thought that was crazy that it sort of tackled this and actually did it quite tastefully.
I might disagree with you slightly on that. I felt like the female characters in particular were quite hypersexualized. The Sister Hyde obviously is super sensuous. She's the only character who's nude. There's obviously the sort of the red silky dresses that she wears, and then she's quite the upstairs neighbor Howard looks at her practically with his tongue hanging out of his mouth, and then his sister, she just seems totally obsessed with marrying Dr. Jekyll. She's like, so keen to get a boyfriend or a fiance or whatever. So I thought the women in the film were quite, not poorly represented, but you're either like, you're in a bar, you're a sex worker, or you're just really desperate, like to get with a man. So I feel like it probably wasn't the best representation, but I'm going to, it's 1971 and it's a Hammer horror. I'm not expecting perfect gender politics here.
Specifically as well, what I want to add to that is the idea of which women are worthy of killing end up being the sex workers. I think I would throw up if I were to say that this is a more progressive ideal of gender politics for a film of that time, as opposed to something which is standard. Especially considering, and this is one of my biggest issues with the film that I sort of want to address up front, I just think that the motivations that Mrs. Hyde actually has are just incredibly either confused or non-existent. It's not, because there are times in which they don't make it very clear that this is a completely different personality from Dr. Jekyll. And there are times, and I think as well, because I think that's obviously the big part of the story, the idea of just that the duality of man, the fact you have a sort of reasonable persona and you have one which is your more monstrous animalistic intentions. It's unclear to me exactly what these personalities actually bring out, especially considering that he's already killing and he then uses her to continue killing, but after a while, oh no, she has a horrible influence over him for out of nowhere that this happens. So I just don't understand exactly why this is. And then just this idea of, oh, I have to battle her, I have to beat her because she's killed one dude more than you actually wanted to kill, I think is really, really kind of problematic and a bit bad. So that's why I'm just a bit confused about what exactly the point of this film is actually trying to get. Because I think, I think the ideas are definitely there. I like the build-up progression of just, oh, this is why he's experimenting with with the hormones because of the idea of extending life. I thought that was all good. But then the fact that his ethics are basically already skewed before going into the potions in ways that her personality just continues. And yeah, like absolutely spot on with regards to the upstairs lady of just the moment she hears about like Mrs. Hyde, she's angry, and then he comes in and says sister, her eyes just light up as just like, great, this guy I've never really spoken to is available, he's mine now. It's just, yeah, I have to challenge these things.
In fairness, if the alternative was sitting at home while her mother crocheted, I'd probably be out the door as well. It doesn't seem like she had a particularly exciting life. The thing that did make me chuckle, though, because we're talking about gender, is that they specifically went after female hormones to extend life. And I find that really funny because in real life, it's always said that, men are allowed to age gracefully, whereas, women, are not allowed to age, or they feel like they have to do like fillers or hair dye or whatever. So I thought it was really funny that it was feminine energy that he wanted, because women are quite famously not allowed to age, as it were. Problematic gender politics aside, I do think it is a rather enjoyable romp, but we'll get into that a bit more later.
Yeah, I think the romp aspect is definitely what makes me, I won't say forgive him, but just kind of made me like kind of accept, as you said, Mary, the kind of aspects that was made in like the 1970s. But I think you're both definitely right. I would agree with everything in terms of like the representation of the women, etc. I think it was just that I was just glad that there wasn't this kind of like easy pitfalls that they went into, especially considering the Hammer has previously through other studios made films like Lesbian Vampires, etc., which very much went with like naked women, blood everywhere. Whereas this, thankfully, I think Martine Beswick was just like, I'm not doing that. And it was just like, I think the performances, what other people have said, is kind of like saved them from being underwritten roles. They brought the most that they could to it.
I agree, and I'm going to preface this now. I think obviously in terms of a romp, there were definitely moments I had a good time. I'm just establishing my stance for later, where I think there is actually going to be a bit of a discussion debate.
Yeah. And I think that's what is definitely true, is that there's ideas and themes presented there. And like you said, Craig, why is this the bad version? I think it very much presents itself as like, as in the description, like he turns into this evil woman. It's like, unless you kind of like are told or kind of shown through visuals that she is evil, there's like nothing really to sort of suggest why you shouldn't turn into that. I guess I kind of saw it as very much the Jekyll and Hyde personalities of just like, she's trying to take over, and she's just driven by kind of murderous instincts, I guess, through whatever reason. I don't know why. I guess the idea with Jekyll and Hyde, as you said earlier, Craig, is sort of like bringing out that like animalistic kind of like nature of man, but that isn't really so present in this story. It's more the kind of like, oh, he's an evil woman, and it's like, why is she evil? You don't know. But I kind of just got on board with the idea of just like, it's a part of his personality which is just trying to take over. So I was just glad that they didn't go to too many sort of like bad jokes or bad cliches, but I did think it was interesting that there wasn't too much of a like, oh my God, it's a woman kind of thing. And the amount that he's sort of like tackling the sort of changing, it seems that there seems to be this identity crisis that he's going through seems very personal in some ways. There doesn't seem to be, I think the star, who played Hyde, Martine Beswick, said she wanted to bring that kind of like idea of gender to the story of like everyone has their feminine side, and the fact that his feminine side is coming out more. I think she said in like a commentary, like, I wanted to push that more. And I think even the director or writer said, we should have done that, actually. You were right. And she was like, thank you. After all these years, she was, vindicated in that. So it was interesting that was an idea presented, and I felt that did come through in her performance, because while I think at the start of the film as well, there's that kind of like typical, oh my God, I'm a woman, etc., but later on there just seems to be this kind of like empowerment that comes from her, and more of a kind of like commentary on the female side when he's seeing his hand change, etc. It's not coming through in like, oh, I've just taken the potion. It's as if like this is just a part of his personality that's coming out.
I think as well it's interesting that when he is Jekyll, he's kind of like flighty and prone to sort of outbursts of emotion, which in the 70s, I'm sure quite a lot of female characters were sort of characterised as. Whereas when he is Sister Hyde, there is this quite masculine energy about her. She's aggressive, she's forward, she says exactly what, she's thinking. She's really, forward with the upstairs neighbour, for example. So I think there is this kind of duality in the sense that when he is a man, he portrays these kind of stereotypes of femininity, and when he's the female, he's almost been quite aggressive and quite masculine, I think.
And also there seems to be this kind of like fear of embracing that feminine aspect, like with the dress, when he like wants to replace his cloak and he's like, they got it wrong. And, the fact that when he is Sister Hyde, there seems to be very much like wearing the red dress to kind of be this bold, like emblematic sort of character, which, like I said, is, and the fact that you see often there's like when they're flipping between the sort of versions and you sometimes see like glimpses of him in the dress, like, that actor there and like his hand and her hand, etc. That's what made me kind of think of like something like drag in the sense that he's like almost that he's like, I want to do this. I kind of want this aspect. I want this kind of like show aspect to me to sort of like put on this performance. And when he is Sister Hyde, he's able to do that. He's able to be more seductive with characters, to be more confident. Whereas when he's Jekyll, he's, more nervous or, he's sort of just focused on his work, which, again, I think that it's helped by those performances, definitely. Not so much like a lot there in the script, but I think that the way that they play it helps a lot in terms of showing what they're thinking inside or the kind of situation that they're going through.
I just think a lot of this needed to be established front up in ways that it just isn't, in order for me to have a lot of the readings of that film.
But that was definitely something that was going through my mind watching it. Was just thinking like, this is still crazy for the time in which it was made, to have this kind of like idea of somebody sort of changing into a woman. And even with the relationship with the neighbors, etc., the fact that you have, I think, like you said, Mary, I agree that I don't like the fact that the Susan, I think her name is kind of like, oh, Jekyll, I'm obsessed with him. And you're like, why? Is this a man who like shuts himself away? That it's not like other characters in which you could understand why there's this kind of attraction there, or like what makes them sort of enticing. There's nothing there about him that would make somebody want to swoon like that, apart from maybe the fact that she just doesn't want to be like her mother, or maybe she feels she can like help him. But I thought it was interesting that there kind of was this rivalry with her brother, and, he took a sort of fancy to Hyde, and when he was like making out with her, I was like, this is almost not like a love triangle. This is almost like a square, in the sense that guy is making out with a man in a way, which I thought was interesting. The fact that the brother and sister think that they're after another brother and sister, but don't realize they're after the same person. It's weird.
In itself, the brother and sister going after the brother and sister kind of gave me the ick, even though it's not anything weird. It's just two people that happen to. But yeah, I thought it would have been an even bolder statement. I don't know if this was ever mooted at any point, but if Ralph Bates had played both roles, Jekyll and Hyde, I wonder if it would have gone as far as it did with the sort of, the sort of sensuousness, the hypersexualization, because it's just a thought popped into my head as I was watching it.
Definitely something I think which might come up. Does that come into casting as well, Craig, in terms of the looks? Or
what do you mean?
Well, something I sort of found interesting was like the way, well, it's in the film, obviously, it's like, the beauty spot and things like that. But I think something that was commented as well was the fact that they looked so alike. They kind of looked like brother and sister. So at least the actors kind of looked like each other. But yeah, it would have been interesting if he had played it. But yeah, and what did you guys think of like the other performances in this, apart from Hyde and Dr. Jekyll, like in terms of like the professor, for example?
I think, to be honest with you, a lot of it was kind of sort of inoffensive, sort of classic British character acting. The one person who kind of stood out to me was Susan, the sister, because I felt like she didn't know when or what her next line was. There was a lot of pauses in between whenever she spoke, and she sort of looked around. And I think I quite liked the Mortician, the character that Philip Maddock played. I quite like that sort of like snarling villain of oh, that's not how I like him, and I've got these blokes over here, and sort of looks almost to camera type of thing. I quite like that over the top sort of vaudevillian type of, character. I would say that on the whole, apart from the two leads, it is just your kind of standard sort of British ensemble cast. I can't say I can comment on it more than that, I have to say.
I do have to agree. I think my favourite delivery in the film was... I think it is the mortician character. If it's someone else, I apologise. Who, when inspecting one of the bodies, and talking about there's nothing there to sell to Jekyll, and then just the way he delivers is the very thing that he wishes to extract has already been extracted, and then just leaves. It's just I don't know why I love that, as well as probably my favourite line of the film that did make me laugh. Is it the police officer? I can't remember his rank. Where when one of the grave robbers is just hanging, just says Burke by name, Burke by nature.
Yeah.
Just out of nowhere, just the bringing in the sting.
I mean, other than that, he was really ineffectual as a police officer. Like, given that there was a killer on the loose and he was just standing at the wrong corner with his whistle, that was all he was.
Oh yeah, and also just being in the carriage saying, "Oh, so we suspect that Jekyll is the killer. Someone has left Jekyll's house. Oh, that someone has now just died. Oh, it can't be Jekyll." It's like, yeah, but he could have an accomplice, right?
But it wasn't the tall man in the tall hat, so...
Also, who announces to the entire world, this is the exact costume we expect you to be wearing in every single one of your murders?
I did enjoy as well how nonchalant the kind of officers were. They like come up to the professor like, there's been another murder, and he's like, when did it happen? He was like, a few minutes ago. And I'm like, well, why weren't you there? Why didn't you do anything? They're always like just around the corner or just there with the torch, and I'm like, how did they keep getting away with this? How did you not see anything? It makes you think like, okay, well, it's fair enough that Jack the Ripper happened if this is the level of policing that was happening.
It's also just how nonchalant the sort of town criers were about every single murder. Just I remember the last one just being like, murder, murder. Dude.
Even they sounded bored by that point. They were just switched off to the whole thing.
I did sympathise with the mother in that sense when she was like, close the window. I was like, yeah, you wouldn't want to be hearing that on a daily basis.
I just thought it was really funny as well when they're obviously on the stakeout and he's just concerned about getting his next drink. And I'm like, sobriety is probably quite key to catching whoever it is, the tall man in the tall hat. And then, of course, they both see the outline of a woman in the window, and all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, he's got a woman in there. And I'm like, again, nobody's paying attention. It was just so, like, they were just so not bothered by it. It was quite hilarious.
I did like the aspect, though, that, like, when those two women are leaving the pub and, they're all, like, drunk and stuff, I like the aspect of at least, oh, who's that in the background? Like, oh, it's a woman. It's fine. So I kind of thought that was quite clever in terms of, like, you wouldn't suspect them. And it's kind of playing with the trope of, like, oh, it's always these, like, women who are like hookers, etc., who die, etc. So I thought it somewhat was playing with that, conventional.
Wait, what? How?
Aspect. In the sense that, like, they see her and they just wouldn't suspect that she would be the murderer. So they're almost flipping that kind of, like, trait.
Cool. That's not quite what you said. But I'm glad that's the sort of opinion. Because the way you say, oh, it plays with this trope of, oh, it's always the prostitute to get killed. It's like, yeah, it was in this film, doesn't it?
But I guess by the end, she wanted to mix it up a bit. She was just like, tonight, a pure blood will die, etc. So she wanted to change it up slightly, I guess, by the end.
I think Susan was just really annoying. That's why she was next on the list.
I've had enough of her. Yeah. That was a moment I had to laugh at as well, is when she was like innocently like going through the mist and she was like behind her and I was like, come on, you would like, why have you... Definitely doesn't seem interested in me. I'll just go for a walk in the dark, which is an odd move when a murderer is around. But also just how unknowing she was that there was somebody behind her, and when she literally like went to stab her and then was like stopped by the Jekyll side, it's just funny that she just didn't know any of that was happening behind her.
In fairness, there was a lot of women in this film who, despite the fact that what I thought was nice was women were looking out for women. They were like, don't walk home alone, walk home in pairs, or you're too drunk, whatever. But then it was like, oh, Don't walk down that really foggy, dark lane by yourself. proceeds to walk down Boggy Dark Lane. No wonder the body count was so high. Everyone was just traipsing off, doing their own thing, and almost not caring as much as the policeman.
Another weird part I found was we were talking about like the sort of more, comical moments, or the big sort of theatrical performances, was when you do see the end of Birkenhair, and there is that moment where you saw like hanging, but then the fact that they're just like, oh, and what I need to find here, and it was just like, oh no, we put him into the, like, what is it, the lime sand or whatever,
the lime pit,
and you just cut to this random scene of him like scrambling in there and like looking at camera like, and then just cut back away again. And I was like, okay. It just seemed very, I don't know, like Family Guy or something.
And just for the rest of the film now, he's just blind and stood on like just on the corners.
Yeah, I didn't understand the lime pit thing. I must admit, there was a strange sort of cutaway when it almost became like Carry On Killing or something. It was a bit of a strange one, but obviously with Hammer, they do these sort of weird kind of comedy touches, right? When they're not doing the big, like, scary, like, bombastic, music and the blood spatter everywhere. There is sort of, because the neighbour, Howard, he was practically doing like one-liners and eye rolls to the camera. I was kind of like, well, he was playing it for laughs, I felt.
Yeah, but we've talked a bit about with like the set and stuff you were saying earlier, Mary. I think that is somewhat of a strength of these kind of films, is that you watch it and you're kind of like, everything's real. There's a kind of like theatricality to it because it looks almost like a play or something. And I was surprised that that influence was there, that apparently like things like Oliver, they almost wanted to make it like a musical, so that's why it very much is like fake sets and stuff. They originally wanted to make it.
It reminded me so much of Oliver, but that's a bit like in a professional Cockney type of thing, and I love the little like footsteps on the cobbles and all that sort of thing. But I really like that kind of set. It's a bit cheesy and a bit sort of two-dimensional, but that makes a lot of sense now that you've said that. I feel justified in my opinions watching it.
And even with the characters, I think it just kind of, I don't know if there's like a homeliness, if you want to call it that, or just the kind of atmosphere, but the fact that they had that guy like, hot potatoes, it's like a film now wouldn't take the effort to like have the potato guy on the street, unless they're doing something as part of the plot, it wouldn't matter, or it would just be a generic kind of paper salesman or something like that. But I just like the fact that it was like a specific hot potato salesman, and then it was the same when you started to see the town crier and all of that kind of stuff. It kind of added to that vibe of Whitechapel and London, etc. The set which Jekyll lives in, his house, it very much reminded me of Frasier, like his brother Niles. It looked like the apartment that he lives in Frasier. So I very much got the idea of like, okay, this man is like, well off. He's got like his lab, which is completely different to the rest of the house, and I think it works quite well when you see him in that setting and he's trying to hit the latch on the door and all of that kind of stuff. But also the transformation, it was quite clever how they did it, where they were, you saw his back and then the mirror, like takes the hands away. And one of my favorite moments was the bit in the glass at the end, when he's sort of like trying to escape, and you see that transition happen through the colored glass. I thought that was quite a clever effect. There's
a moment like earlier on in the film that kind of precedes the moment in the glass, which I also really, really loved. But I can't work out if it's like a broken mirror or a pattern on a window, but it's split into three. And there was his face was in two halves and her face was in the middle. And it created this weird sort of almost alien-like look. And I was like, oh, I actually paused it. I was like, this is so good to look. This is beautiful to look at. And they obviously kind of replicate that a little bit at the end with the red and the clear glass. Also, just the ending in particular, again, to go back to what I said earlier, it reminded me of Frankenstein. You've got the village or the crowd at the bottom, and, he's up on the roof and they're sort of shouting at him and the police are after him, and there's obviously the kind of high drama. And it did really remind me of one of those like classic monster movies as well. So there's lots of little nice touches throughout that I thought were actually really well executed, if you'll pardon the pun again.
Yeah, I had to sort of pause that end part with the face, with, it was meant to be kind of like an amalgamation of both personalities. And at first I was like, not sure if I quite see that, or if it's just a kind of like injured face because they've just fallen off a building. But I appreciated the effort to show, those two sides. And yeah, I think the mirror one is a good example. Like I said, it's, you got like these great sort of like props. They had that knife which he used, and I think that's what caused it. He threw the knife and it kind of split the mirror. And of course you got your sort of typical green and red potions, and it all looks like very mad scientists, very much like you said, like Frankenstein, etc.
But also with the mirror scene, I'm pretty sure there are moments where every now and then, which part of the face they're meant to represent do switch at times, so it creates that effect even more. I did really like that in terms of what they were going for. Again, yeah, with the end face at the bottom, I was curious as to exactly what stage of the transformation that is meant to be, as opposed to just looking like screw it, throw a bunch of glue on his face.
I can't remember which victim number it is, but when he takes the sex worker back to his apartment and she asks him to obviously unlace her corset, and there's that beautiful little, it swapped really quickly from you actually see him physically killing her to the shadows in the wall, and the shadows are spattered with blood. I really like that as well, because it was kind of like a sort of Victorian sort of zoetrope type thing, which obviously fits in with the era, but it also probably helped them get around a little bit of censorship as well if they weren't allowed to show too much. So I really like that scene as well, because that's quite cleverly done.
All right, well, grab those video cassettes and roll them, wind them again, because it's time for VHS Corner. So a lot of this is just going to be talking about certain anecdotes that comes from the actors themselves. I think there are times in which one of you, I'm not going to name which of you, but it's probably going to be the one who's talked consistently about watching all the behind the scenes several times over and over again, may have alluded to some of these things, but we'll just go into them in a bit more detail. I'll start with actually a nice one, because believe it or not, Ralph Bates ended up meeting his future wife in this film, because he went on to marry Virginia Weverall, who is one of the prostitutes that he killed. Yeah, so what a way to start out. How prophetic that is, I don't know. But in terms of, this is one thing that Mary was alluding to earlier. Ralph Bates did actually say after the film was released that he thought the Hammer could have been bolder by allowing him to play Sister Hyde in drag. So it is something that he wanted, but the studio very much was sort of still against, because there was still a lot that they had to sort of deal with. Note how the scene that I sort of already mentioned about not really making much sense was in an attempt to try and actually cut down on some of the violence that they were showing. That's why they had the rabbit gutting, etc., etc. And now we come on to Martine Beswick, because she said several things about her time on the film. So the first was that when she was offered the role, she originally laughed at the idea, but then she thought it'd be interesting to explore the male-female inside people. And she also added, it was great working with Ralph Bates, especially when they had to transform from Jekyll into Hyde, which they said was quite challenging and quite very interesting. Because obviously what they would have had to have done is that she would have been acting essentially reverse from him. So she was just in the mirror acting out, which technically is why I thought that shot was a particularly good one. And now we come on to the nudity, because obviously this is something that Hammer, up before this film, didn't actually use in the way in which they used it, right? Because she appears topless, something which didn't really happen before this era of films. So Martine Beswick said that she agreed to go topless when she took the role, but during the film, the director, Roy Ward Baker, said she should do a full frontal shot. And she obviously didn't want to, and they argued about it to the point that they ended up not speaking to each other for about a week. Eventually they made up, and then she agreed to be fully nude. But then the film would only allow her to show her breasts and her butt on screen, not any pubic hair, so basically it didn't matter. But in order to film it, she still had to be totally naked on set, to which she demanded a close set, which was agreed upon, but then she remembers seeing, and I quote, dozens of people hanging from the rafters in the studio during the shoot in order to take a look at her. So I think that's one of the things that in the back of my head of just, yeah, I'm not going to call this film in any way progressive towards women. Finally, this wasn't the only attempt to make this particular type of story, because in 1995, this film actually did get a remake called Dr. Jekyll and Miss Hyde, so MS Hyde. So no nuns in this particular picture this time. In the end, it starred Tim Daly, not to be confused with the swimmer Tom Daly, and Sean Young, And it ended up receiving a Razzie for the worst remake / ripoff. And so that is everything from VHS Corner.
The closed set, not closed set thing makes me so uncomfortable. Like, it's only really recently in the past few years you've heard film sets talk about like intimacy coordinators and really being respectful of actors, and that, what a horrible experience that must have been. I feel like shame that I found this film a bit fun now. That's really gross.
Yeah, I think what also didn't help is the fact that, because if you also look at it narratively, I don't know how you guys felt about it, but it also just didn't feel like it was necessary nudity as well. It was very much just for one, why were you conducting any form of scientific experiment in just either a trench coat or a dressing gown? At which point you just open it up and then just, like, your breasts are there, and it's just, oh wow, I'm gonna. And doing the thing is, I had to go at in my head, I had to go at last week's film for doing this, Your Name. What is it with the trend of just the moment a man turns into a woman, straight for the chest? Straight, come on.
There must be a survey or scientific research somewhere that, they asked 100 guys, what would you do first if you became a woman? And all of them said, I'd play with my boobs.
Also,
that must be a thing.
I didn't realise how hard I actually hit myself in the chest doing that. Ow! Oh, God.
I also think that the Ralph Bates thing is really interesting because I thought he gave a really good performance, and I just think that it would have obviously been a totally different film if he had been playing both parts. I guess it probably was too forward-thinking for then, but it would be really interesting to see how that had, or how he had pitched it, or how it, panned out.
Yeah, I think I didn't see about that in terms of like him actually playing the two roles, which definitely would have been interesting. But yeah, what I had seen more about was just the fact of Martin Beswick wanting to play with the idea of that tackling of gender in terms of like, bringing out your feminine side, questioning those aspects of like everyone's got a feminine side, everyone's got a masculine side, and showing those through the film and different sequences and performances, which I think she manages to do to an extent, but it's very much limited by the script. But obviously,
I still don't think that, even if it is present, I still don't think it does anything to actually benefit the story of the film. That's the issue I have.
Yeah, no, I think it's more adds to her performance, but yeah, I think you're right in terms of it doesn't add to the story. It doesn't make it more clear about the kind of how Tony is within his mind. You don't know whether to just take it as like, oh no, I'm turning into somebody different, or whether it's a gender-based thing. There's moments in which you can kind of see it, but you just don't know if that's coincidental to the situation.
It's just hilarious considering that he's very clear at the front of the film. I'm only doing this because I think it's going to make life go longer for people. And it's just, even if there was a discussion like of just what this would do for the, for the mind of the person or whatever like that, I'd be more sympathetic to those causes, but it's just not. It's just done for the absolute most pragmatic reasons you can think of, and then just everything else is just way too much subtext.
Is there any other sort of notes you guys would make on any other technical aspects in terms of like music, etc.? I thought that was quite standout, like especially the opening. You got the candle and everything. It seems very theatrical. It kind of there very much is a theme there.
That opening theme, in terms of what the tone of the film was, because for context, I think the actual sort of main musical motif for Sister Hyde I thought was really good. I just thought the opening theme was way too upbeat for what the story actually wanted to be. Because it was just very sort of full-on energetic, like, woohoo, let's go killing people randomly.
It also sounds like I love this sort of, as I said, the sort of big bombastic, like the over the top, like brass when he's, murdering someone or whatever. But the opening, like over the title credits, and the credits are all like nice and twirly. And then there was these kind of strings over the opening credits. And I was like, is this a love story? Because obviously I didn't know anything about it. So yeah, I would say the opening music's a bit confusing. But I like that sort of over the top. You can understand the musical influences for sure. The score is very, very, it's almost a character in itself. It's quite striking.
Yeah, I think that it does very much come across as a very Pride and Prejudice kind of like, that they wanted, maybe that's where the whole like Oliver musical inspirations were coming from. But so it kind of takes you to that world and that theatricality. But I do most probably like the sort of Sister Hyde theme, that when he becomes Sister Hyde, that there's always that kind of theme there. Sometimes it's very overplayed, sometimes, like you said, with the murders, or when certain like action beats are happening, that you're like, oh, here it comes again, and then it goes quiet for a while, and then the same song sort of comes in. But I kind of did enjoy that there was, at least that was helping to sell the kind of like evil aspects to her, and the dual identity of like, this is her theme, and this is there was a strong kind of motif to that music, which I quite enjoyed. It also reminded me of the way in which the character was named, because Craig, is this actually in Jekyll and Hyde lore that he gets it from Hyde Park?
Hyde Park, yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think it's just the way it was played in the film just made me laugh. Like, oh, what's her name? And he's like, just see this paper like Hyde. It's like, that's a lady's name? Yeah.
But the significant difference here is that in the originals, Hyde names himself. I think this is why I actually have an issue with the fact that she's called Mrs. Hyde. At no point does she choose any aspect of her own identity. She doesn't choose any of her own motivations. That's why I'm like, I would respect this film so much more if she literally had any semblance of a choice, in which it just appears she just doesn't.
Yeah, it does feel like, actually, now that you've said that, that makes a lot of sense. She has almost, apart from the professor, she has no agency whatsoever. She's essentially doing what he wants to do but can't do himself. Ooh.
Like, why didn't she choose her name at any point? Because it was like her brother never gave her a name. And I was also surprised at Susan going, like, so what's your sister's name? Hyde. Sister Hyde. Oh, does she not have a first name?
I know that seemed odd that a woman wouldn't even, is she, Sharon, Jane, whatever. And it's just, oh no, Hyde. But, okay. And then I've obviously said Mrs. Hyde, because there was a sort of flicker across Susan's face as, oh, why wouldn't you have the same last name or whatever? But that was the only sort of query it looked like she had about her name.
That's what made me laugh when she, was changing back. And I thought there would be that moment in which, like, he was just there in the dress or something. She was like, you have to go now. And it was like her, like, back to them. And then once they left, she sort of turned around and was still there. And I was like, oh, I kind of wanted to turn around and it be him.
I was so hoping it was going to be him. I was so disappointed.
My big issue is, look, whenever it comes to, say, the movie vault, we kind of look at the films we have on a couple of grounds. One, do we think this is a groundbreaking film with excellent quality that should be remembered for all time? And I think, as much as it can be enjoyable, I don't think it is a groundbreaking film that can necessarily be put forward. On those grounds, I wouldn't put it in. Second of all, if it's basically playing with sort of a well-known story, what grade of expectation for that story do we think it is? And I think no one is ever going to see this as a definitive version of the sort of Jekyll and Hyde story, because of exactly the reasons I talk about, right? The reasons that Jekyll and Hyde is actually quite interesting is because you watch those dualities play off against each other. That just doesn't happen to a significant extent with this film. And then in terms of, is this the best representation of a Hammer horror? Absolutely not. I think you have... I mean, you have the traditional films are the ones that people are going to be going back to. You have Frankenstein, Dracula, those stories, the sort of, traditional monster universe kind of stuff, which I think people will just go to massively more before something like this. Which is why I think there are moments I definitely enjoy, but I think overall as a film, it doesn't really do it for me.
Mary, what do you think? Do you think it deserves to be remembered for all time in our movie vault? What would you say?
Oh, I'm afraid not. I think I definitely enjoyed it, and there was lots of elements of it that were really fun. But I mean, I don't even think I would go back and rewatch it. I know that sounds terrible, but it was fun for a one-time viewing, and I think that it was progressive in some ways, but not progressive enough for me. But good fun, but probably not something I'm going to remember even just a few months down the line, as terrible as that is. Sorry to whoever suggested it. But no, I don't think it goes in the vault, I'm afraid.
No, yeah, I think, I definitely agree with you guys. As much fun as I had with the film, and, I would sort of chuck it on again in the future, but it's not something that, I would say, you need to watch this. This is a must-watch Hammer horror film. And, I think even by Sarah's, admission, last episode, she was talking about her favorite film, like the film that she would want to put in the movie vault was a Jekyll and Hyde sort of adaptation from, like the early days of Hollywood. So almost there, there is a better version of this story out there. I think that this can be appreciated. There's definitely some cool aspects to it, some, fun aspects, that idea of, the villainous woman, etc., and, the playing and having that twist to it. But then it just doesn't go far enough with it, and I think it's not memorable enough, and it mixes in a few different stories like Burke and Hare as well, which kind of muddies the water a bit more. And as Craig said, there's a lot more memorable kind of hammer horror as well. So yeah, I think consensus on that one is, it definitely enjoyable watch. Glad we watched it, but unfortunately not going into the movie vault this week.
And I think that's the first time in this new string of episodes we've done that we've actually not put something in.
Keep it coming. We want to talk about the controversial movies, the ones which we have to really, really question. It's always enjoyable.
We're in the endgame now.
Okay, endgame time. So this is a game I've lovingly called Endgame Time for a Change. Obviously, this is a film which is a great example of what a lot of films tend to do, which is basically take a story from a classic novel or play and basically try to create some form of spin on it in terms of what can we do. And I think a number of films try to do this, both sort of in the era that we've been talking about, or even in the more modern day. And by that I mean lots of 90s stuff. So what I've done, and this is basically going to be a sort of a penalty shootout, is I've gotten a lot of films which their plot is basically derived in some way from a traditional play or a book. I'm going to, one by one, give you that film, and I want you to try and guess what book or play it was originally based on. Note, there are several films which are based on the same book or play. So, for example, the amount of films I could name you which are based on something like Hamlet, like I can literally give you an example now of The Lion King and The Northman. Basically, doesn't worth saying. So basically, don't be like, oh, they've said it, therefore this cannot be the answer, sort of thing. Basically, I have two sets. What I'll do is, before we start playing, Mary, I will give you the option between set A and set B as to which ones you want. But before we get to that, I think we should have a little glance at what we'll be playing for. Obviously, we'll be, as usual, be playing for the opportunity for either David or Mary to decide which of the films, based loosely on the conversation that we've had this week, we'll be discussing in our next full discussion episode, which will be in, David will explain that later, but it won't be our next episode. So, as usual, we'll give you a little sort of teaser as the sort of film you'll be playing for. So, David, give us a little hint at what you would choose if you were to win this endgame.
So, I wanted to still stay with something which was kind of like period. Watching Jekyll and Sister Hyde kind of made me think of films that kind of happen within, those kind of like eras, playing with stuff when you see things on like theatrical sets. And so seeing like a lot of those like physical props, etc. And I think that while this is looking very much at like London and that kind of stuff, there's like these certain types of movies that sprung to my mind in terms of showing stuff from like olden times, which is very much like kind of genre and a period in itself, which is visited a lot within different kind of mediums, whether it be through fantasy or sort of like real dramas. But this was, kind of different in the sense that this was from the early 2000s. We're also looking like a bit at kind of like the evolution of like female characters in some ways. There's still kind of like this, the male gaze kind of in this film, but it kind of showed the change that we're going towards now, in which like female characters became, a bigger part of films, and they became, more central, and that they could play like, action roles rather than just being the damsel in distress. And I think that this was one of the sort of early films which had quite a big name actress for that time in it, and sort of like changing that sort of narrative. So yeah, my one is kind of in that link.
David there playing for the behind the scenes of Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde. Okay, wonderful. One thing you didn't say is, what year is your film from?
2003.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
You're
that's what I
talking
said.
all that crap about early stuff, and it's like, yeah, it's the early 2000s.
No, that's what I
Yay!
meant, yeah. No, that's what I was saying.
Wow.
That, like, how we've gone from, like, that period, like, when period things were, like, played in that time, but I said that's the link, but I want to see then the difference to when it's come through to, like, the 2000s.
Okay, so we've got David with his 2003 potentially progressive film, but then David's already demonstrated what he believes progressive is on this podcast. Mary, give us a little teaser about if you got to choose the next film we get to discuss. What is it, and what year is it from?
So the film I had in mind is actually from 1972. It's only 1 year after Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde, and I think it takes problematic gender politics to a whole nother level. And it has that classic British ensemble cast with a few professional cockneys thrown in.
Okay, already I think I know what you're going to go for, and I want you to win. So
I mean, if you want me to win, like, the chat box is there.
I mean, okay, we will see how this goes. So, like I said, we have 2 sets of 5 questions each. So, Mary, as the guest, you get to choose. Would you like set A or set B?
Oh, I'll go set A and get this over with, because I'm rubbish at these.
Okay, so set A will be Mary, and set B will be David. Okay, so like I said, I'll do this one question at a time. If you get it right, you get a point. If you don't get a point. Simple as that. Okay, so Mary, your first film. You ready?
Yes.
Bridget Jones's Diary.
Emma?
Is it Emma? It's Pride and Prejudice.
What? Okay.
So
I mean, there's even a Mr. Darcy in it. How thick am I? Right, okay.
I was like, the diary?
Okay, David.
Yep.
Your first film. 10 Things I Hate About You.
Oh, I know it's Shakespeare.
That's about as far as David's knowledge goes, don't worry.
Oh, I'm going to kick myself when I hear it. No, I can't remember.
Taming of the Shrew.
I should have gone with set B.
Okay. So, Mary, your next question, or your next film. Deliver Us from Eva.
Oh, I've never even heard of that. Can I get who's in it? Am I allowed to have a clue?
It is a film from 2003 which stars... Oh, this is a great start. LL Cool J. Gabrielle Union. Megan Good. D'Artagnan Edmonds. Yeah, I don't think you're going to know
that's
anything.
that's definitely not helped.
Okay. I'll be nice. Both of you can have 1 hint per set.
I genuinely don't have a clue. I had no context for what this film's about or anything. Sorry.
Okay, so you're going to pass?
Yeah.
This was also Taming of the Shrew.
Oh, no way.
Yep.
Great.
Okay, David, your next film. The Dark Knight Rises.
Dark Knight Rises.
Yep. A lot of the plot is derived from a particular book or play. Or heavily inspired by, I should say. According to Christopher Nolan.
Doesn't help I'm like, damn, I wish my book mind was better. I don't know. I'm just going to go Troy or something like that. Some like mythic tale.
So you think there's a book called Troy?
Well, but I was just thinking like Hercules or, some kind of like rags to riches thing.
Okay. It is A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
Oh. I was actually thinking Dickens in my head, and I was like, no, I can't think of anything.
Clearly not. You went for Troy.
Well, originally, and then I was like, I just tried to think of books, but then I was like, I don't know, he's a superhero, and just go for something like mythic.
Okay. Mary, are you ready for your third film?
Yes.
Pretty Woman.
Oh.
And I'll say for free, it's not based on My Fair Lady, because My Fair Lady is based on the same thing.
Oh, Pygmalion.
Ah.
I was thinking My Fair Lady, and I'm so glad you said that before I opened my mouth a little.
Oh.
Yeah. So, okay. David, are you ready for your next one?
Yep.
You're gonna hate me for this one. The SpongeBob SquarePants movie.
Oh God, what?
See if this turns out to be like Macbeth or something.
Is this would it be like Captain Nemo or something like that because of the whole Poseidon kind of stuff?
It's Homer's Odyssey because of the idea of the journey.
Right. Every film ever.
No, but specifically the sort of quests and encounters that basically go on. So,
yeah.
And also because obviously quite legendary, right? Because anyway. Okay. So with 2 questions each left, the score is 1 to Mary, 0 to David.
Oh God.
Mary, your next film. The Nutty Professor.
Can I have a tiny clue?
Well, think about what the plot of that... first of all, have you seen The Nutty Professor?
I mean, I have, but presumably like 20 years ago now. Or
Okay.
20.
Can you remember the basic plot of that film?
Not really. I know that he ends up in a fat suit.
Yeah, so you've got a guy in a fat suit. Presumably, at some point, he's no longer fat.
Oh. I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to pass. I was going to say something ridiculous like Frankenstein, but I can't even think.
So you are really going to kick yourself for this one. It's The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
It was like, I needed set A.
He takes a potion to get rid of the fat, and it creates an alternative personality, which is a douchebag thin person.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was... So I've got it in my head in reverse. I thought he ended up in the fat suit.
Oh,
Yeah.
No. Sorry. I mean, I would say that that is the Eddie Murphy version, the original version with what's his name?
Jerry Lewis,
yeah. It's basically he's a nerdy scientist who takes a potion to make him the coolest guy in the world. Okay, David, are you ready for your next film?
Yes.
She's All That.
She's All That.
And I'm going to be nice and I'm going to give you your hint for this one.
Okay.
And literally, it is the fairest hint I can give because it's one that's already been given. You don't say it's My Fair Lady because it's based on the same thing.
Right.
I mean, I'm saying nothing. I just got Jekyll and Hyde.
Of course.
So.
No. It's
Well-
fine. It's fine.
No. That's confused me even more. I don't know. Pride and Prejudice.
I literally said this. Like,
Oh, was it?
Pygmalion!
Not, what's that?
Pygmalion!
Oh, it is. Oh, God. Right.
That's why I said it's literally the same hint.
Oh, no. I thought you meant in the sense of like, it's something else that's also like My Fair Lady. And I was just like,
no,
what else is
no.
it?
Literally.
Oh, right.
Don't. Oh my God.
God,
I tried. I gave you both what I consider to be free answers. Okay. It'll be interesting to see what happens with the next two.
oh dear.
Because depending on what happens, I could easily see this going to a tie break, and I do have a tie break ready. Okay, so Mary, your final film is the animated film Barnyard.
Oh, Animal Farm?
It is Hamilton. And with that, we will go into David's final question, but with that, you have won the end game. So congratulations. David, so just to see if you can end with a score, your final film, and I think you should get this one, It's The Lion King 2, Simba's Pride.
No. Well, there's Hamlet for the first one, but then I'm like, is it like still Hamlet?
Right. Do you want to think about this before you answer? Right. What's the plot of Simba's Pride?
Basically, father doesn't want... Oh, Romeo and Juliet.
Yep.
Yeah. I was still thinking of like the whole like king father stuff. I was like,
Yeah, no. So notably, the Lion King films, all of them have some connection to Shakespeare plays in some way, including Lion King 1.5, which technically is related to a play which was written about characters in Hamlet.
Oh, is that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are dead?
That's exactly what they essentially use the plot of for Lion King 1.5, because it's Timon and Pumbaa just doing what those guys did in that play to the Lion King instead of her.
That's why Mary deserves this win, because I'm terrible with books and adaptations and that kind of stuff. I almost was like King Lear or something. I was like
so 2-1, the winner is Mary.
Yay.
It's never happened before. I'm so glad this has been recorded for posterity.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, Mary, you have won the Endgame, so obviously it now means that you get to choose the film that we end up discussing in our next episode. So please tell all of our listeners out there, what are we going to be looking at next time?
You are going to be looking at, and I'm so jealous, you're going to be looking at Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy.
Okay, that wasn't what I was expecting, but okay, fair enough. That sounds good.
Yes. It's one of my favourite films, one of my favourite Hitchcocks. So I'm excited that you guys get to discuss it.
I was actually, weirdly, I was thinking like Hitchcock, and there was so many avenues I was thinking of going down, and I was like, do I go down the classic, film route, and like what was made at that time? And I was thinking, we haven't done Hitchcock yet. So I did think of, throwing a Hitchcock one in there, but okay, cool. So yeah, well, next time we'll be talking about Frenzy from 1972, as you said, 1 year after the film we're discussing today. And what was your description earlier? It's kind of takes all the stuff we were talking about in terms of gender even further, is it? Or?
Yeah, even worse. I feel like it's coming to the end of Hitchcock's career, and I feel like this is the type of like grubby, seedy film that if he could have gotten away with making it, years earlier, he would have done the same. And it kind of plays around with sort of dual identity and, the male gaze. So I hope you enjoy it.
Awesome. Okay, so yeah, next time we'll be talking about Frenzy. So if you want to join in the conversation at home and watch along with us, at the moment you can rent Frenzy on places like Apple TV. You can catch it on YouTube, Amazon, Chili, Sky Store. So you can definitely like rent this if you go check it out online. Or of course, as we said with our previous film, there's always physical media, DVD, Blu-rays, those kind of rental services exist as well. So yeah, go check out Frenzy to join in with the conversation. We'll be look forward to talking about it next time. And yeah, it's crazy that we haven't had a Hitchcock film turn up yet, and it's good that it's one of the more like random, I guess, sort of Hitchcock films rather than your typical Birds and Psycho, because I definitely know that me and Craig have done some Endgames which involved like references to Hitchcock, but we've not done as much sort of talking about his films. So yeah, well, thank you very much for joining us, Mary, and congratulations
Thank you so much for having me.
On your win. So before we head off, can you just tell us where the people can find you on socials and more about your website, where they can see your writing and your podcast as well?
Sure. So you can find me at moviescramble.co.uk or jumpcutonline.co.uk. And if you want to give me a follow on Twitter, it's at Miss Mamie Peas.
Awesome. So yeah, go check it out. And for us, if you want to listen to the next episode talking about Frenzy, our next one, we are having a break from our sort of film discussions. We're going to have a kind of mid-year discussion of the movie vault. So interestingly, in this episode, a film hasn't gone into the vault, but we'll be kind of recapping the sort of last 6-7 films that we've discussed why they went into the vault, looking back at some of the things we didn't get to mention with them. We'll also be joined by our previous guest, Paul Klein, and we'll be sort of having a update for the vault up until this point in the year. So just how we did at the start of the year, going through everything that was in there previously, we're going to kind of give people a catch up on what is in there and what we've sort of been discussing so far in the year. So if you want to check us talking about Frenzy, then that one will be out in our first June episode. So look out for it then. So yeah, thank you once again, Mary. We look forward to talking about Frenzy in the next episode. Craig, anything lastly from yourself?
Not really, unless you want me to continue doing more of the Arthur Jekyll Hyde song.
That's going to be an earworm for the next few days. I can feel that on me.
I do need to go back and actually watch it because I would love to learn some of the verses.
Oh, there's actually like more to just the chorus.
Yeah, because he I remember it. He describes that one of the ingredients for this potion is suntan lotion.
That's like the only part.
Power of rhyme.
That's like the only part I can actually remember.
Definitely a YouTube search after the recording. So we've got Moon Knight, Kenobi trailer, and Jekyll Hyde. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to catching you on the next one. So catch you later. Bye.
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 To keep up with the latest episodes of Well Good Movies, you can listen to us on all your usual podcast outlets, including Apple, Google, Spotify, YouTube, and more. Don't forget to follow us, subscribe, and rate us where you can to keep our podcast growing. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Well Good Movies to keep up with the latest news and highlights from all our episodes, as well as tell us what movies you want to be discussed in the future. And if all of that isn't enough, you can also find us at our website, freshtakehub.com/wellgoodmovies, where you can catch all our episodes along with videos and articles deep diving into the worlds of film and television. So what are you waiting for? Go check out the film we'll be discussing in next time's episode.